Yakov Djugashvili was the eldest child of Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. Unlike many of the children of tyrants throughout history, there would be no favoritism or succession planning for the son of Stalin. He would meet an ignominious end, abandoned and unacknowledged by his infamous father. Yakov was born in 1907 to Stalin and his first wife, Ekaterina Svanidze, who died 9 months after his birth. In those days, Stalin was a young revolutionary, on the run after a high-profile bank robbery, and the child was left with his deceased wife's family. By the time the boy was 14, his father had reached the center of power in the Bolshevik Revolution, and Yakov was brought to Moscow. The young man would endure a difficult time. As a native Georgian speaker, he didn't understand Russian. Worse than that, his father had no time for him and treated him poorly, including refusing to allow him to change his name to Stalin. It is not known for sure why, but the general impression was that Yakov reminded him of his dead wife, of whom he was apparently extremely fond. Despite these tribulations, Yakov was a kind and good-natured boy who enjoyed close relations with his half-siblings and stepmother. But he suffered from depression and made suicide attempts in the years following his arrival in Moscow. One such attempt in 1928 nearly succeeded. Having been refused permission by his father to marry the girl of his choice, he shot himself in the chest, narrowly missing his heart. Stalin reportedly dismissed the attempt by saying, "He can't even shoot straight." He would eventually marry that girl, and would marry once more in his life, fathering 3 children in all, one of them out of wedlock. As he reached adulthood, he wanted to become an engineer and study at university, but Stalin initially stood in his way, eventually relenting when Yakov was 23. Graduating in 1935, he worked as a chimney sweep engineer at a factory that bore his father's name. Then in 1937, Stalin interfered in his life again, insisting that he enroll in artillery training school. This he did, eventually graduating on the 9th of May 1941, just days before the start of the German invasion of Russia. The dictator sent his son, together with his adopted son Artyom Sergeyev, who would later become a major general in the Red Army, directly to the front lines. Yakov served as a lieutenant in the 14th Howitzer Regiment, in the 14th Tank Division, commanding an artillery battery, but was captured soon after by the advancing Wehrmacht on the 16th of July during the Battle of Smolensk. A glorious propaganda story was disseminated, detailing how Djugashvili had refused an order to retreat. In reality, the battery surrendered in the normal way, and fellow soldiers, who despised the Soviet system, betrayed his identity to his captors. His seizure was gleefully announced by the Germans on the 19th of July, prompting a furious reaction from Stalin, who, amongst other things, had Yakov's wife arrested. He was enraged that his son had not taken his own life, particularly since the dictator had decreed that no member of the Red Army was to surrender, under any circumstances. After fruitless attempts to conceal his identity, Djugashvili was handed over to the Abwehr, German military intelligence. During interrogation, he criticized the Red Army and Jewish people, despite his wife being Jewish, and praised Germany. This was all a propaganda gift to the Germans, who dropped psychological warfare leaflets picturing him over Soviet lines. The leaflets included part of a letter he had written to his father, detailing good treatment at the hands of his captors. The Soviets responded by giving him the Order of the Red Banner and praising his courage in action. He was then sent to a guarded villa in Berlin, with plans to use him in Russian-language propaganda broadcasts. When that didn't happen, he was forwarded on to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. While there, he became something of an exhibit, with many dignitaries of the Reich visiting him and having their photograph taken with the famous prisoner. This began to have an effect on what had always been fragile mental health. When the Germans surrendered in Stalingrad, Hitler offered to exchange Yakov for the captured General von Paulus, which Stalin refused. The tyrant also refused a later offer of a swap for Leo Raubal, Hitler's captured nephew, reasoning that a show of favoritism could be disastrous for morale and the collective effort. Yakov Djugashvili died at Sachsenhausen on the 14th of April 1943. For years there was debate over whether he had committed suicide or been killed by the Germans, but captured archives revealed that he ran into an electric fence after a dispute with British prisoners, then was shot by guards who believed he was trying to escape. An autopsy confirmed that he had been electrocuted prior to being fired on. On being informed of his death, Stalin appeared to soften towards his son, calling him, quote, a real man. He added that, quote, fate had treated him unjustly, which is probably about as near to an apology as anyone was going to get from Joseph Stalin. Accidents of birth can decide much in life, for good or ill, but there is no doubt that for Yakov Djugashvili, being the son of the all-powerful dictator of the Soviet Union, which should have offered him total protection, instead brought him nothing but unhappiness, mental pain, degradation, and an untimely death.